February 11th, 2012, 9:47 p.m. Beverly Hilton Hotel, room 434. Whitney Houston placed a phone call that would never appear in any official investigation report. Her hands trembled as she dialed, not from the champagne she'd been drinking, but from what she had just discovered in the hotel safe. 3 hours later, she would be dead. But the question that haunts investigators to this day isn't how she died. It's what she knew. The Grammy Awards weekend had transformed Los Angeles into a glittering celebration of music's elite. Whitney had arrived at the Beverly Hilton on Thursday afternoon, February 9th, checking into the same suite she'd stayed in dozens of times before. Room 434 wasn't just another hotel room. It was her sanctuary, her escape, the place where she'd written some of her most personal songs in leather-bound journals that security teams later claimed never existed. Ray Watson, her longtime bodyguard, had escorted her to the room at 3:15 p.m. He would later tell police that Whitney seemed unusually anxious and requested that he personally check every corner of the suite before she entered. This wasn't standard protocol. Whitney had never made such a request in the 8 years Ray had protected her. When investigators asked why he thought she was nervous, Ray's answer would send chills through the detective team. She kept looking at her phone like she was expecting a message she was terrified to receive. The suite was everything you'd expect for a music legend. Marble bathroom, separate living area, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles. But there was something Whitney noticed immediately that made her blood run cold. On the bedside table sat a sealed manila envelope with no markings, no hotel logo, no return address. Just her name written in handwriting she recognized but hadn't seen in 17 years. She asked Ray to leave, locked the door behind him, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at that envelope for 43 minutes. Hotel security cameras captured her shadow moving back and forth past the curtains, pacing, stopping, pacing again. At 4:28 p.m., she finally opened it. Inside were 3 photographs and a single typed note. The photos showed Whitney at locations she'd never discussed publicly. A recording studio in Munich for 1995, a private beach house in the Bahamas for 1998, and most disturbing of all, a hospital corridor from 2001 that she had sworn to 3 people she would never speak about. The typed note contained just 7 words. They know. Meet me. Tonight. Room 219. But here's what nobody saw coming. Room 219 wasn't in the Beverly Hilton. It was in the hotel next door, the small, unremarkable courtyard where nobody would think to look for Whitney Houston. And the person who sent that envelope? They'd been dead for 6 years. At least, that's what the death certificate said. Whitney's mind raced through 17 years of memories she'd buried. The recording sessions that went too late. The business partners who asked too many questions. The contracts she'd signed without reading because her then-manager insisted they were standard industry agreements. And most haunting of all, the young backup singer who'd approached her in 1995 claiming she discovered something about Whitney's record label that could destroy careers and end lives. That singer, Maya Richardson, had died in a car accident 3 weeks later. Single vehicle collision. No witnesses. Case closed. Whitney pulled out her phone and made a call. Not to Ray, not to her daughter, not to any of her family members or management team. She called a number she'd kept in her phone under the contact name, Emergency Only Detroit. The phone rang 4 times. A male voice answered, confused, asking who was calling. Whitney said just 5 words. It's happening again. She's back. Then she hung up. Security footage shows Whitney leaving her room at 5:47 p.m., taking the stairs instead of the elevator and exiting through the hotel service entrance. She wore oversized sunglasses and a baseball cap, the classic celebrity disguise that somehow still works. She walked 3 blocks, checking over her shoulder every few seconds, before entering a small electronics repair shop called Tech Fix. She emerged 22 minutes later, carrying a small plastic bag. Inside that bag was a digital audio recorder, brand new, still in its packaging. Whitney would later tell her assistant that she was documenting something important, but refused to elaborate. What she recorded in the hours that followed has never been found. Police would later discover the recorder in her hotel room. but its memory card had been removed. To this day, nobody knows where that memory card is or what conversations it captured. Back in her hotel room by 7:15 p.m., Whitney ordered room service, a turkey sandwich she barely touched, and 2 glasses of champagne she drank quickly. Then she did something that her entire security team found bizarre. She requested that all security cameras on the 4th floor be temporarily disabled for privacy reasons from 9:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. Hotel management complied. They always complied for Whitney Houston. At 9:47 p.m., she made the phone call that would change everything. The call lasted 11 minutes and 37 seconds. Phone records show it was placed to a Los Angeles number that, when traced by investigators, belonged to a disconnected landline last registered to a commercial property that had been demolished in 2008. Impossible. Yet the call connected. Someone answered, and Whitney spoke with increasing urgency, her voice rising and falling in a rhythm that hotel guests 2 rooms away would later describe as arguing with someone she was desperately trying to convince. What do they discuss? The only clue comes from Ray Watson, who was stationed outside her door. Through the heavy wood, he heard Whitney say clearly, "I have proof. Real proof this time. And if anything happens to me, it goes public." Silence. Then, "You can't threaten me anymore. I'm not that scared girl for 1995. Whoever was on the other end of that call apparently disagreed about whether Whitney should still be scared. Because when the call ended at 9:58 p.m., Whitney immediately texted her daughter Bobby Christina, "I love you more than life. Never forget what I taught you about trusting the wrong people. If something happens, the answers are in the blue folder." But here's the problem. When police later searched Whitney's belongings, they found no blue folder. Not in her hotel room, not in her Los Angeles home, not in her storage units. Either Whitney was being cryptic or someone had removed that folder before investigators arrived. And given what happened next, the second option seems terrifyingly likely. At 10:23 p.m., hotel security cameras, which had been turned back on, captured something unusual. A figure in a hotel staff uniform knocked on room 434's door. Whitney opened it, exchanged brief words, and allowed the person to enter. The figure carried what appeared to be a room service cart covered with a white cloth. But here's the chilling detail. Whitney hadn't ordered room service after her 7:15 p.m. meal. And when investigators later reviewed the hotel's room service logs, there was no record of any delivery to room 434 after 7:30 p.m. The figure remained in Whitney's room for 18 minutes. When they left at 10:41 p.m., the cart was gone, replaced by a small briefcase that hadn't been visible when they entered. Security footage shows the figure walking calmly to the service elevator, taking it to the parking garage, and driving away in an unmarked white van. License plate? Conveniently obscured by mud. Investigators would later determine the van was a rental paid for in cash, rented under a name that didn't exist. Whitney appeared in her doorway at 10:43 p.m., looking up and down the hallway, as if checking whether anyone had witnessed the visit. Then she retreated inside and locked the door. She would never emerge alive again. Between 10:43 p.m. and her death approximately 12 hours later, Whitney made 4 more phone calls. One to her brother, lasting 2 minutes, in which she reportedly said, "I need you to remember what Dad told us about the Munich sessions." Her brother would later tell police he had no idea what she meant. Their father had never mentioned Munich. The second call went to her longtime friend and makeup artist, Ellen LeVar, lasting 6 minutes. Ellen later reported that Whitney sounded paranoid but determined, and kept saying she was finally going to set things right. The third call was to that same Detroit number from earlier, 1 minute, 40 seconds. And the fourth call? That one's the mystery. It lasted 7 minutes and connected to a number that investigators have never publicly identified, citing ongoing investigation concerns. 12 years later, that investigation has yielded 0 public results. At some point during the night, Whitney took a bath. This isn't unusual. She was known for taking long baths to relax and think. But what is unusual is what hotel housekeeping discovered the next morning. The bathroom counter was covered in handwritten notes on hotel stationery, dozens of pages filled with names, dates, and numbers that appear to be some kind of code or record-keeping system. One page had just 3 words written in capital letters. Maya was right. Remember Maya Richardson? The backup singer who died in that convenient car accident in 1995? According to the notes Whitney left behind, Maya had discovered something about the way major record labels were using creative accounting to steal millions from artists while simultaneously using those artists as unwitting participants in money laundering schemes. The notes referenced offshore accounts, shell companies, and a network of executives whom Maya believed were connected to organized crime figures. Whitney's notes suggested that Maya had given her copies of financial documents proving these allegations just days before Maya's death. And here's where it gets darker. Whitney wrote that she'd hidden those documents in 1995 and never looked at them again because she was too afraid of ending up like Maya. But now, in February 2012, something had changed. Someone had found out she had those documents, and they wanted them back. The question is, who knew? Whitney had told exactly 3 people about Maya's documents over the years, according to her notes. One was her father, John Houston, who died in 2003. One was her former bodyguard, David Roberts, who mysteriously left her employment in 2004 and has never given a public interview. And the third person? Whitney's notes refer to them only as DL. No full name, no other identifying information. Investigators have never confirmed who DL is, though speculation has ranged from various music executives to personal friends to people whose identities remain completely unknown. At 6:30 a.m. on February 11th, Whitney was seen on security cameras entering the hotel's gym for a brief workout. She appeared agitated, constantly checking her phone, and left after only 12 minutes. At 7:45 a.m., she met her publicist, Kristen Foster, in the hotel restaurant for breakfast. Kristen would later tell investigators that Whitney seemed unlike herself, almost manic, talking rapidly about needing to fix old mistakes and protect Bobby. When Kristen asked what she meant, Whitney changed the subject and started discussing Grammy Awards logistics. But then Whitney leaned across the table and whispered something that Kristen found so disturbing that she reported it to police. "If I die this weekend, it won't be an accident. Look at Munich. Look at Maya. Look at the blue folder." Kristen thought Whitney was being dramatic, perhaps struggling with substance issues or paranoia. She suggested Whitney rest and skip some of the weekend's events. Whitney smiled sadly and said, "It's too late for rest now." That breakfast ended at 8:37 a.m. Whitney returned to her room, and security cameras show her door remaining closed until 11:42 a.m., when she emerged to meet her hairstylist and friend, Raffles Van Exel, in the lobby. They spoke for 16 minutes. Raffles later told investigators that Whitney asked him a strange question. "If you had evidence that could destroy powerful people but also destroy your own legacy, would you release it?" Raffles, thinking this was hypothetical, said he didn't know. Whitney nodded and said, "Neither do I, but I think I'm about to find out." At 12:23 p.m., Whitney went back to her room for what she told Raffles would be just a quick bath before the pre-Grammy party tonight. Ray Watson was stationed outside her door, as usual. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Ray knocked to check on Whitney, as was standard protocol. No answer. He knocked again at 3:35 p.m. Still no answer. Growing concerned, he used his security override card to enter at 3:36 p.m. Whitney Elizabeth Houston was found submerged in the bathtub, unresponsive. Emergency services arrived within 6 minutes. She was pronounced dead at 3:55 p.m. The official cause of death would later be listed as accidental drowning with heart disease and cocaine use as contributing factors. But here's what makes investigators uncomfortable. The crime scene photos show something that doesn't quite match the official narrative. On the bathroom floor, partially hidden under a towel, was a phone, not Whitney's phone, but a burner phone that had never been registered to anyone. It contained exactly 3 outgoing calls, all made that morning, all to the same unlisted number. And it contained 1 received text message, time-stamped at 2:47 p.m., just minutes before Whitney would have entered that bath. The message read, the folder, or your daughter? You have until tonight. Police have never officially confirmed this phone's existence. Every time journalists ask about it, they receive the same response: no comment on evidence related to an ongoing investigation. But multiple sources close to the investigation have independently confirmed its presence in the room. So why the secrecy? What number did those calls reach? And who sent that threatening text? The water temperature in Whitney's bathtub was another anomaly. Coroner reports indicate the water was significantly hotter than typical bath water, hot enough to cause scalding and disorientation. Whitney was known to take hot baths, but this was extreme even by her standards. Could someone have intentionally made the water dangerously hot? The hotel's water heating system showed unusual activity that afternoon. Someone had manually overridden the temperature controls for the fourth floor at 2:15 p.m., raising the maximum water temperature by 18 degrees. Hotel staff claimed this was routine maintenance, but there was no maintenance scheduled for that day. And then there's the issue of the blue folder. Police eventually discovered that Whitney had rented a safety deposit box at a Los Angeles bank under a false name in January 2012, just weeks before her death. The bank has never confirmed what was in that box, but sources claim that when police opened it, they found a single empty blue folder with a note inside. If you're reading this, they got to me first. Look deeper. The truth is in Munich. Maya died for this. Don't let me die for nothing. But what happened in Munich? Investigators traced Whitney's 1995 recording sessions to a studio called Musicland Studios, which closed in 2007. Former studio employees were interviewed, but most claimed to remember nothing unusual about Whitney's sessions, except for one sound engineer, Thomas Brandt, who gave a statement that police have kept sealed for reasons they won't explain. All that's known is that after giving his statement, Thomas left Germany and hasn't been seen since. His family claims they don't know where he is. His former colleagues say he became paranoid and obsessed with staying off-grid. The manila envelope that started this entire chain of events? It disappeared from room 434 before police finished processing the scene. Multiple officers confirmed seeing it during the initial sweep, but when the evidence log was compiled, it was nowhere to be found. Someone removed evidence from an active death investigation scene. That someone had access to a heavily secured crime scene, and nobody saw anything. Ray Watson, Whitney's bodyguard, gave a statement to police and then resigned from security work entirely. He moved to Montana, bought a small ranch, and has refused every interview request for 12 years. The one time a journalist managed to reach him by phone, Ray said only, "I couldn't protect her from what she was facing." Nobody could have. Some truths are too dangerous to know. Then he hung up and changed his number. The Grammy Awards proceeded the next night, February 12th, with tributes to Whitney throughout the ceremony. But one person was noticeably absent from those tributes, a music executive named Damian Lawson. Remember DL from Whitney's notes? Damian Lawson had worked with Whitney's record label during the exact time period Maya Richardson was investigating financial irregularities. 3 weeks after Whitney's death, Damian announced his retirement from the music industry at age 51, sold his Los Angeles mansion, and moved to Switzerland. He now lives in a country with very strict banking secrecy laws and no extradition treaty with the United States for certain financial crimes. Bobby Christina, Whitney's daughter, tried desperately to get answers about her mother's death. She repeatedly told friends that her mother had warned her about dangerous people and that Whitney's death wasn't what everyone thinks. In January 2015, almost exactly 3 years after Whitney's death, Bobby Christina was found unresponsive in a bathtub in eerily similar circumstances. She died 6 months later. The official cause, drowning with drug intoxication as a contributing factor. The exact same official cause as her mother. Before Bobby Christina's death, she had started her own investigation into what happened to Whitney. She hired a private investigator named Marcus Chun, who had previously worked financial crimes for the FBI. Marcus worked the case for 8 months, following leads to Munich, the Bahamas, and offshore banking havens. Then suddenly, he returned all of Bobby Christina's money, closed the investigation, and refused to discuss what he'd found. Friends say Marcus seemed frightened and told Bobby Christina some doors should stay closed. Your mother tried to open them, and look what happened. The Detroit phone number Whitney called twice on the night of February 11th was eventually traced to a small law office that had been closed since 2010. But property records show that office space was purchased in 2011 by a shell company based in Delaware. That shell company is owned by another shell company in the Cayman Islands. That company is owned by a trust in Switzerland. The beneficial owner of that trust? Sealed by Swiss privacy laws. Hotel guests who stayed on the fourth floor that weekend have reported strange details that never made it into official reports. One guest claims they saw someone in a hotel uniform entering and exiting room 434 multiple times throughout the night of February 10th, always carrying what looked like equipment cases. Another guest reported hearing raised voices and furniture moving around 11 p.m., right after the mysterious room service visit. A third guest said they saw a man in a business suit lingering in the hallway outside Whitney's room for at least an hour around midnight, pretending to talk on his phone, but never actually dialing. The white van that the fake room service person used was found abandoned 3 days later in a long-term parking lot at LAX airport. It had been professionally cleaned. No fingerprints, no DNA, no trace evidence of any kind. The rental company's records showed it was rented at 2 p.m. on February 11th using a credit card that was later determined to be connected to an identity theft case from 2009. The person whose identity was used had died in 2007. Maya Richardson's death in 1995 was briefly reinvestigated after Whitney died, but the case was quickly closed again with the conclusion that there was no evidence of foul play. However, Maya's sister Jessica has spent years trying to get the case reopened. She claims that Maya had told her about the documents just before her death and that Maya was terrified of music industry people who had connections to dangerous criminals. Jessica says Maya mentioned names, powerful executives, and producers who are still working in the industry today. But without evidence, her claims have been dismissed as conspiracy theories. The financial documents Maya allegedly gave Whitney have never been found. If they exist, they're hidden somewhere that has eluded investigators, family members, and private detectives for nearly 3 decades. Or they were destroyed years ago by someone who knew exactly what they contained. Either way, whatever truth they held died with Maya, and now with Whitney and Bobby Christina too. There's one final detail that keeps investigators awake at night. On the morning of February 12th, just hours after Whitney's body was discovered, someone logged into Whitney's email account from an IP address in Prague, Czech Republic. They permanently deleted 3 entire folders of emails, thousands of messages spanning from 1995 to 2012. The folders were labeled Maya, Munich Sessions, and Financial Questions. Email recovery experts tried to retrieve them, but found that whoever deleted them had used military-grade data wiping software to make sure they could never be recovered. Whitney Houston's death was officially ruled an accident, but the collection of coincidences, disappearing evidence, threatened family members, and mysterious communications paint a very different picture. Whatever Whitney discovered in that manila envelope on February 9th led her down a path that ended in room 434's bathtub just 2 days later. And whatever she knew died with her, or worse, is still out there in the hands of people powerful enough to make evidence disappear, witnesses go silent, and investigators look the other way. The Grammy Awards now include an annual tribute to Whitney Houston, celebrating her incredible musical legacy. But nobody at those ceremonies mentions the burner phone, or the blue folder, or Maya Richardson, or the Munich documents, or the threatening text message Whitney received minutes before her death. Those details remain locked in sealed investigation files that the Los Angeles Police Department says they'll keep confidential for the foreseeable future. 12 years later, 3 women are dead. One private investigator is too terrified to talk. One sound engineer has vanished. One bodyguard lives in hiding. And one music executive enjoys his Swiss retirement. And somewhere, either in a forgotten safety deposit box or destroyed long ago, lies evidence that might explain why Whitney Houston spent her final hours making desperate phone calls to disconnected numbers and warning her daughter about powerful people who don't want their secrets exposed. The truth about what happened at the Beverly Hilton Hotel on February 11th, 2012, remains hidden. But one thing is certain: Whitney Houston knew something that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. And in the end, they made sure she took that secret to her grave.